Welcome back to our continued Global Networking Forum here in the Duma Hall. And I'm very pleased to welcome you here for a very special and original Global Networking Forum session, which will engage international journalists and media representatives to discuss the key role that media can play and plays to communicate highly complex and technical space subjects to the broad public in an understandable and captivating way. Once again, I remind you that you can engage with the discussion using the Slido system by asking questions and rating them. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome here on stage our moderator for this session, Remco Timmermans, founder of SpaceSide and social media specialist. Remco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this very special Global Networking Forum session. I'm very happy to host this media panel for you this afternoon, and I'm very happy because this is one of the first times, if not the first time, that IAF is bringing the space media on stage. The space media, as Christian already said, plays an important role at events like these, but of course also for our industry in general, as the channel for telling the world about all the exciting things that we do in space. My name is Remco Timmermans. As Christian said, I'm the director of SpaceSide, a media agency specialized in using social media in space organizations. I work for several clients in space technology, events, and space applications. I'm very proud to have with me here 4 representatives of different media channels from around the world. And I will let them introduce themselves one by one with the following question. So I'll ask you to please introduce yourself and briefly describe the position of your news channel in bringing space news to your audiences, and how do you see your role as journalist in setting the tone about space news. And Stacey, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure and an honor. I represent RT, Russia Today, the TV channel, the global network of TV channels, and I'm a producer for space news and space coverage. Why our source is a great source for space news is because we broadcast in several languages, in English, in French, in Arabic and Spanish, in German soon, and in Russian. And what's fun for me to do at RT is that you have to communicate what space is for each of the nations through our network. It's very interesting because the space is very international and it's very varied, and our TV represents that really well. And the amount of coverage we get and the amount of views we get really helps us to get the message about space into the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to the other side of me here. We're socially distanced, as you can see, so my panelists are quite far away. But Stephen, if you can answer the question.
Yes, hello.
You have to press the button.
Is that
yes,
work? Lovely. Good afternoon. Thank you, Remco, very much. My name's Stephen Cole. I am the executive producer and host of The Agenda with Stephen Cole. I named the show, put my name in the title, so it's harder to fire me, to be honest. I've been following space all my career, which is basically a news career. But space exploration, I've always known and followed because it is of such huge public interest, and it also needs broad public support. And that's why it is incredibly important to have a supportive media. In Britain, Remco, you'll know very little is publicized about space. We had The Sky at Night, a long-running late-night show, but that was more about astronomy than space. And we had shows like Tomorrow's World that featured interesting inventions. But space was never really discussed. And space institutions and scientific journals haven't always been accessible enough to tell stories that will grab the public imagination. And that's where space and the people who run space have failed very badly, because there is nothing, in my view, more exciting than the potential and what is going on at the moment. And just listening for the last couple of days, offline and online, to the discussions here, that space is no longer the final frontier, and that's why it should get more publicity.
Thank you. That's, I completely agree with that. A very passionate statement, so thank you for bringing that so clearly to the audience. If it's okay, we'll stay on this side. Maxime, can you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. First, it's a great honor to be here in this beautiful hall where we have seen a lot of space leaders from all over the world for the last few days. My name is Maxim Pedushkin. I'm a Russian reporter for Aviation Week. This is one of the oldest aerospace magazines in the world, I believe. It was founded in the United States in 1916. And since then, we cover aviation and space industry. In fact, we have awards. We have been named Aviation Week and Space Technology since 1958. So my role is to report about Russia and about Russian aviation industry and about Russian space industry. Yes, it's very interesting, in fact, because I have a chance to compare, and I see that if we compare aviation and space is really more exciting because people get used to aviation, get used to big aircraft, but when we write about space, it's really something fantastic, something unbelievable, and it's sometimes hardly to believe that people can do things like as they do in space, like send big ships to space, like control spacecraft miles away from Earth.
Thank you very much, Maxime. And I like to hear the word excitement and excited a lot, because that's really what we're trying to relay to our audiences. I'm very happy to introduce a last-minute change to the schedule, but we found Leif prepared to step in for someone who couldn't make it, and I'm very happy. So, Leif, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I may be the last minute stand-in, but I'm probably the only representative in the panel who can remember the 12th of April, 1961. I was 5 years by the time, and I heard about a man riding on the back of a rocket in the radio, as I recall it, and rushed to the street to watch to the sky to see this Russian cosmonaut on the sky. He probably had returned to Earth long before I got the news through the radio. But he became an inspiration for me, and only 15 years later, I entered the Niels Bohr Institute of Physics in Copenhagen and had decided that I would become a physician. After another 15 years, I experienced, sadly, that space has a very bad image in the media. So I quit science and joined journalism and found myself back in that radio I heard in 1961. And now, after 40 years with journalism and media, primarily radio, I have quit journalism and started on my own independently as an educator, teacher, and consultant, bringing science and communication together, teaching in journalism and science communication. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Leif. And it's interesting to have a hardcore radio man here, if I may say so, representing a large part of the history of what happened, especially here in Russia and in the early days, that many people actually experienced through radio. So it's really good to see that represented. And we'll have a look at the evolution of media as we continue this panel. But the first question I'd like to ask really talks about this history and how things have progressed over time. So the way space exploration activities have been portrayed and promoted to the non-space community and the general public has changed and evolved over the past 60 years. In those same 60 years, public opinion has changed and evolved too. From global excitement, there's the word again, in the 1960s, maybe in the 1970s, to much less interest, less knowledge, and even an anti-space attitude in some cases nowadays. So, to your opinion, what is the role of media in influencing this public attitude, this not always very knowledgeable and even negative attitude sometimes towards space exploration? And I'll start with Stephen this time. Button.
Okay. In 1999, in December 1999, I came to Russia to see the election of President Putin. And when I got back, I'd launched BBC World at that point. And when I got back, I was asked whether I'd like to do a new show for BBC World. And the choice was either doing a business show or an IT show. Well, there wasn't any IT, really. I mean, phones then were still pretty big. So I said IT, and I called it Click Online. And it went around the world and exported it to about 28 countries. And the reason I think it was a success was because I knew absolutely nothing about IT. And so I kept asking what you might call the stupid questions. And there were the questions that people were often too embarrassed to ask. And I think with space, you need that as well. You need that almost complete zero amount of knowledge to keep being curious, to keep asking. In my early days of journalism, we had specialist reporters. We had royal correspondents, a Europe correspondent, financial correspondent, political correspondents. But we never had a space correspondent. Now, one early way you can increase knowledge and increase awareness in the media public is through having a specialist correspondent. Not on a journal, not on a scientific journal, in a news machine. Because they will tell the stories that people can find accessible. And the really good stories, and we're talking about a story here today, 60 years ago, Yuri Gagarin going up to space. And we remember Yuri Gagarin, even now. Even people who don't follow space remember him. I was just talking to Pascal. She remembered, Shepard. She remembered the people who've been to the moon. So the best stories, and my argument is the best space stories, are always told through people. And if you can personalize space stories, then you're halfway there. And of course, the big story, the current story at the moment, is creating interest, is the billionaire Jeff Bezos. He's the richest man on Earth, and he's taking his brother on a jolly to outer space. And people are paying millions to go with him. That's a great story. But if you use Bezos as an example, so people, oh, Jeff Bezos going to space, and then explain something about space, you've got an easy audience.
Well, thank you very much. Maxime?
First, I don't agree that general public lose interest in space. What I've seen, maybe it's my personal perception, that it's a new revival of the interest to space business, to space in general, because I think that space becomes closer to every one of us. Here we've seen a lot of small countries that set in very ambitious goal to reach moon, to send spacecraft to space. We see a lot of private companies that come to space business, and this means that people are getting more and more interested in this sphere, to my mind. Speaking about the role of the media, I think space media is no different from general media. Our role is to tell stories, to tell people what is going on in space business in a language they can understand. And we should educate people, we should explain them what is space and what is space exploration. And now we have a lot of means, a lot of new means to do it, because we have internet, we have video, we have audio. All these technical means, they become cheaper and more accessible to any journalist, and he can make its coverage more wide and more quick.
Thank you very much. I'm writing down a few keywords while you speak, because there's a message here, and I will summarize that. Stacey.
I would like to ask you all to think of Yuri Gagarin. Do you remember the videos of Yuri Gagarin going to space? Do you remember the videos of the Apollo 11 mission going to space? I think we are all imprinted in a way with these images in our head, and we only have them in our head because they have been in the media. They're only there in our head as a story because the media at some point published them, and now we're republishing them. And every single person in the world who has a TV or has internet connection has those images. So the question I would like to ask all of the people on the panel, as well as the people in the room, is how do we imprint more space images into people's heads? There are several ways of doing this. First of all, as my colleagues have mentioned, we need more people, more personas for space, because the Apollo 11 mission and Yuri Gagarin are personas who live with us. This is a story you will never forget and you will want to tell to your children. And if we do not create more personas like such in the industry, they will not be imprinted. The stories won't stay forever. It could be done by books, because everyone knows of Tintin, right? And that also lives everywhere. It's not a real hero, but everyone knows that that's about space. That's how children are told about space. And today, we need to figure out a way of not just having Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk as space representatives, but other people, because we need people from the industry. We need the companies and the state agencies to start giving us people we can talk to and we can show their representation in the papers. To me, as a journalist, one of the biggest concerns is that when I try to connect with a company or with a state agency, I cannot find contact. I start Googling, let's say, some space agency communications officer or representative, nothing. Or I go on a website and I can't find a phone. So for me, as a journalist, the only way of meeting you is through conferences like such. So I come here, I meet people, I get the cards, and I am blessed in this way. I get to meet all of you in person. But let's say there's a space enthusiast somewhere in a small country and he doesn't have the resources or the time or the possibility to come. How is he going to tell your story? So please go back to your websites and create an email which is not info@spacecompany.com, but press@spacecompany.com or inquiry@spacecompany.com. That will really help me and everyone on this panel to tell your story, and your story should be imprinted in everyone's brain. Thank you.
A very powerful message indeed, and it's true what you say. It's interesting to find out, and maybe Life remembers that better than me, but following Gagarin's mission, following Apollo 11, in those days, at the moment itself, was a radio thing. There were no live images. The images that we have of the Apollo crew landing on the moon only came to Earth much later. So when it actually happened, there were no or very few images and nothing was live, so it was a radio thing. So, Life, how do you see the media influencing this public opinion about space?
Well, I do remember, as you and recall, the science coverage and the space coverage in the 1960s, in Gagarin's era, as exciting. Those days, science was exciting, space was sexy. What happened and followed in the 70s, as I recall it, was that the global competition on space got linked to or swallowed by the Cold War rhetorics. It became like big politics instead of big exploration. And what happened in the 80s was even worse, perhaps. Then science and space was linked to pollution, to industry, to cynical capitalism and exploitation, and to creating problems for the globe, rather than being integral solutions to the problems of the globe. So science gradually, during the 70s and 80s, got a bad image, and it's still struggling with that bad image. The Greta Thunberg generation, they prefer panic to information. And they do find science and space a waste of time, a waste of money, and a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution to the problems that the globe faces today. So I do think that the task for science and communication is to reconquer the stage as a sexy and needful activity. And I do have a few hints onto how that could happen. But to draw on my memory again, in my high age, you're right that Gagarin was a radio phenomenon, even in highly developed Denmark, where I come from. Less than half of the population owned a TV set in 1961. So it was definitely a radio phenomenon. Gagarin was a radio star. Whereas the Apollo landing was a TV phenomenon. And nowadays, it's perhaps not radio nor television that should bring the third gloriful era of science back to the media. That's the social media. To me, the ISS live feed on Facebook is what Gagarin was to me as a radio listening child, and Apollo was to me as a TV watcher in 1969.
Interesting, and especially realizing here in the building we have a few exhibits about Gagarin, and if you look at the newspapers that came out in those days, none of them that report about Gagarin are dated the 12th of April. They're all dated the 14th of April. So there was already a delay in bringing this message, even here in Russia, to the local audience. And that's something completely unheard of nowadays with live streams from the ISS. And if we lose the live stream for a minute, you see some of the space enthusiasts complaining straight away that they have missed a minute of what's going on in space. That's a key thing, that's the space enthusiasts. We do seem to have a very small audience interested in space. I'm happy to see many of them here and on the live stream, but it is a very small minority. And just to repeat some of the things that were said, because I think these are strong messages, and I really like what Stephen said, is it's the role of the media to ask the stupid questions. Because what we see as stupid questions in the media are actually the actual questions that people have, because when we talk about space exploration, as we have done in the past 3 days here, we take a deep dive into technology and using a million acronyms that all of us understand and using difficult words, and nobody out there understands it. It is important that the media picks up that role to ask the stupid questions and to try to keep that excitement that we've mentioned a few times, that I think is a key word, in our messaging, and try to bring that excitement, inject that excitement into the audience. Another important thing that both Stephen and Maxime brought up is stories. What we do as media really is translating what's happening here into stories, into bite-sized stories with a subject, so a personalized story. Stephen mentioned that literally we have to personalize these stories, because a story about the technology of a spacecraft may be very interesting for us, but you really have to bring that down to the level of how it impacts people, into language that they can understand. The final thing that I noted, and I'm glad that Leif mentioned it, is space was sexy in the 1960s and 1970s. I don't think we consider space sexy at the moment, at least the general public doesn't. So the question really is, how can we make space sexy again? And I like the word because it's a word that we don't use in the industry, but that is what we need to do. So thank you for your comments. I'll move on to the next question and the next topic that we'd like to discuss, and that is about the advance of new online communication channels, which is having a big impact on media consumption worldwide. Science is showing that things like filter bubbles caused by algorithms feeding potentially biased information may cause polarization, and we all know what I mean, biased information and opinion forming with the audience. So how do we think that journalists, the professionals, if you like, in storytelling, can help bring a supportive, balanced and unbiased view of space exploration without losing our role of critical observers? And Leif, if I may start with you.
Sure. Well, having spent my life divided between science and communication, and now trying to combine the two, I find simplified that the inhabiting contradiction is that scientists know a lot about science, but they're not good communicators. Sorry. Journalists, on the other hand, they're good communicators, but they're bad in understanding science. And I do think that those two professions, communications and science, have a lot to gain and learn from each other. And I would like to make an announcement, if I can. Now I have the opportunity to speak in St. Petersburg, because in this very city, there is a university called ITMO, with the slogan, "It's more than a university." And they combine science and communication in a splendid way. You can get a master in communication in an environment surrounded by and inhabited by scientists. And you cannot get a science master without having met journalism students. And these two professions, they kind of cross-fertilize each other in a splendid way. And the result is masters in communication with a knowledge of science, and masters of science with a knowledge of communication. That kind of cooperation is really one of the main keys to a better future for science communication, I believe.
Okay. I'll go to the other end of well, the spectrum, I almost say, of my little world here. Maxime, what is your opinion on the role of new media and social media and how journalists play a role? Maxime, play a role in preventing this polarization?
I think, of course, it's a quite serious discussion about balance between social media and traditional media in the current world. Many people say that with the rise of internet, we see the death of traditional media. I don't believe so. But as for me, I think if you speak about how to remain supportive, balanced, and at the same time critical to the things you write about, every one of us has its own experience. But from my point of view, we, as a journalist, we have a more serious attitude to the issue we write about, and we should learn more what we write about in space business, of course, to stay closer to the industry, to better understand it, and that's why we can keep interest in what we are writing about and stay critical at the same time, because it's important for traditional media to give a really balanced view, to give a profound, to go into details, and that's what we as an industry media can do. We can go into details and to explain more thoroughly what is going on compared to the social media.
May I ask as a follow-up question, Maxime,
Sure.
in your role as in Aviation Week, what is the importance of social media in Aviation Week compared to the magazine?
In fact, we try to balance between magazine and social media. We have a very strong presence in social media. We see it as a channel to deliver our information to our audience. We have about 600,000 followers in LinkedIn. We have about 200,000 followers in Twitter, and we are very strong we have a rising audience in Chinese social media like Weibo and WeChat. So for us, it's an important thing because it's a quick way to deliver your message, deliver news to your audience. But it's a way to bring audience to your content, because people they see our titles in social media and they go to our website and to read our stories if they are interested.
Okay, thank you. Stephen.
Can I just go back a few seconds and explain that it's so important to your previous question, Remco, please excuse me, to show the benefits that space exploration would bring to society. That's a good way of reaching people. Improvements to healthcare, finding ways to protect planet Earth. So, okay, we're going to shoot for the moon, and we're going to shoot for Mars, and we're going to shoot for outer space, but connect that to the green campaign here on Earth, and help, show how those scientific discoveries through space are, in fact, having an impact down here on Earth, as everybody really thinks about climate change. I mean, that's a good way of reaching people in two ways. But in terms of broadcast technologies, there hasn't been that much change for a very long time. There is very little fundamental difference between the live feed of Apollo 11 in 1969 and the ISS in 2021, just possibly the addition of color, increasing resolution, bandwidth, etc. Now, there is also a very little difference in how that content is consumed, mostly passively in front of a screen. But it is incredibly difficult to get people's attention. The novelty of landing a man on the moon has long since worn off. And the difficulty is providing and telling people's stories of science fact when they're so used to science fiction. Most of them couldn't tell the difference. And you've got to make science fact as interesting as science fiction. Reporters on the general beat don't know really their science, which goes back to my idea about specialists again. The general public isn't that much interested in science. They're interested in novelty, the spectacle. The only thing I think that would really grab the public imagination is landing a person on Mars or finding extraterrestrial life on Mars. There you have a very big story, or another celestial body, indeed. Without a man in the picture, man isn't necessarily interested, related to the point of, a scientific probe or instrument isn't as interesting as a man doing these things. And when, a lot of young people's concentration on new media is about as long as 5 seconds, you really do have to find ways of reaching that young audience. It's very difficult.
It is. I was kind of hoping you would give us the secret on how to...
Oh, you have to pay me for that.
Sorry?
You have to pay me for that.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Makes sense. Stacey, I'll go to you, please.
I would like to bring some positivity for a second. And I would like to say thank you to the global pandemic for something very certain, very special, podcasts. During the pandemic, I saw a huge surge in interest in space because all of the people who usually go to these conferences, they had to go online. And what did they do? We created a lot of online conferences. For example, IAC last year was online as well. Very popular, very convenient. We came there, we talked to each other. But also other people were able to attend. During the pandemic, if you take a look at what's happened to Facebook and YouTube, a lot of people started inviting other people at home to come talk with a glass of water, a drink, tea, to discuss space. And you know what? There is an audience. We did create a buzz, and people did come to listen to us. So sometimes it's not the problem of someone not wanting to talk to us or to hear what we have to say, but us not going out there and not reaching out to the new people in order for them to hear our message. So we're talking about new media here, right? And I can give you a couple of really good examples of people communicating space to a very wide audience. For example, let's talk about Everyday Astronaut. This guy went to Cape Canaveral in a spacesuit, and he created great social media, and he has a great following because he took a spacesuit to Cape Canaveral, and he told people about space. Another option is Space Gal. This girl created online shows about space, and she was trying to make space accessible. The problem of our industry is that scientists think that either what they do is difficult or boring, and no one is making an effort, or almost no one, to make it simple and to gain the attention of the public. And trust me, if you interest a kid with a toy from Star Wars, you can interest a kid with a toy of something that actually went to the moon. But it's easier, much easier to show a child Star Wars or any other movie and tell them that's space, instead of sitting down and explaining something more difficult but yet more exciting. So I would really like to see in a couple of years that kids are playing not with something fictional, but something real, because what this industry does is amazing, and the problem is that we think that this is rocket science, but it's not, because if we got here, I think that the rest of the public might as well.
Well, thanks very much. Leif?
Thanks. It warms my old radio heart to hear this praising of podcasting, because that's radio, just even better because you decide when you listen to it. Talking about how to embrace the media and becoming sexy again. I agree to the role and to the effort that the pandemic made. It simply made microbiologists and epidemiologists rock stars of the media of today, and saviors. Instead of representing the dangers, they suddenly represented our saviors, bringing us health, those who developed the vaccine, etc. There was a long time between two epidemiologists at primetime TV just 2 years ago. Something has happened here, and I think this is like the vacant image for science and space, also to exploit, seeing ourselves as saviors or surveyors of our globe, space for the climate, along with the outreaching, exotic who's going to first land on the Mars race. That's not that sexy any longer. But space for the climate, marketing cosmonauts as global gardeners or climate watchers or the like, that could be a way to embrace an already existing positive wave for future generations. It's not like the technicians backstage we should promote. We should promote the Cosmos for Climate movement.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. Can I just add to what that was absolutely right. And it's true also to say that every business and organization and government wants to know how to communicate in this internet age. I can tell you this, YouTube has allowed a flowering of space-related channels, some generalist, some very specialist. It's a bit of a golden age in that regard, I think, but only for the converted, because the man in the street, again, has to be persuaded to watch this. The middleman has also disappeared. If I want to see a live feed from ISS, I don't need the BBC or CBS or RT or CBCN, to show it to me. I can go directly to NASA's website or YouTube channel or its Twitter feed. And speaking of Twitter, space agencies know how to upload bite-size content that's heavy on visuals. As I've just said, the public has the attention span of a goldfish. So it has to be by storytelling. Space is no longer the final frontier, and setting up those space correspondents will give them plenty of time on air. There is one very good example of that, and that's Colonel Chris Hadfield, who you may know, 166 days in space on 5 separate missions. They're all the astronauts have been pilots and commanders of space vehicles or former Air Force pilots, and I made a note about some of his stuff. His time in the spotlight was during Expedition 35 to the ISS in 2013, and this expedition was a changing point because it greatly upped the social media game with Colonel Hadfield as the star of the show. He did Q&A sessions with school kids, had been done before, but instead of a point-to-point feed between classrooms and the station, this was broadcast widely on social media. Instead of answering questions just from school children, he'd answer questions from the internet with things like, can you cry in space? This is a sort of space content people just eat up. And it's a sort of direction I think social media should go to try and create more interest in space.
Excellent. And actually, Stephen, you triggered a thought that I use often in my talks about social media. What Chris Hadfield did during that exact mission was setting an example on how social media can actually involve a much wider audience, breaking out of the space bubble, if you like, by something special that he did. And I'm sure most of you have seen him playing the guitar on board the ISS and covering a David Bowie song. And that video that was created, was put on YouTube, was watched hundreds of thousands of times without the permission of David Bowie. That created some kind of an issue, but that was later solved. But what he did is he brought space to, which has a very limited audience, to music lovers, which has an extremely big audience. And by playing the guitar in space and by turning upside down and by letting go of his guitar, he triggered questions in those music lovers who watched that for the song. And that was a very good thing.
And we all know the name of the David Bowie song, of course. But what was also important about Colonel Hadfield, I think, Remco, is he has an obvious fascination for the subject, but his enthusiasm is infectious. People can see how much he enjoys what he does and how much he knows. And that will communicate to people.
Yeah, and with that, we're back at the word excitement, personal excitement. So it's personal stories, making it personal. Exactly as you said before, Stephen, and me as a social media professional, that's what I try to do, is make the stories personal, make it matter to that person in the street that you mentioned. I would like to follow up with one little thing that you, Anastasia, triggered me, and that's the role of influencers. You mentioned a few. but how do you see the role of these influencers? We have a few in the room, we have a few with us online. What is the role of these social media influencers, these self-taught people who can grow very big, like Everyday Astronaut and Space Gal, and there's quite a few more. But how do you see their role versus, well, if you like, our traditional role?
Unfortunately, as my colleagues have just mentioned, we live in a world where the audience has a lifespan, a memory span of a goldfish, right? So what space is missing in a lot of ways is narrative. And what influencers do, they give narrative. For example, before coming to the conference, I decided to build a personal brand on Instagram. So what did I do? I started showing my path to this conference on Instagram. And the amount of good thoughts that people gave me is incredible. They wanted to see me on a train. They wanted to see where I'm sitting. They wanted to see what I'm eating. They wanted to see who I'm seeing. And every time I posted something, people were like, is there an astronaut? Is there a cosmonaut? Is there someone? Is this that? You know, people are getting excited. But in space, we often create a piece of news which happens today, and then tomorrow it's irrelevant, because that's how the news work. But if we create a narrative where there is a person, for example, training to becoming an astronaut, right? That's an influencer. I would love to see what a person thinks when he wakes up before going on his first spin in the centrifuge, for example. A lot of people ask me about training. There is a pool. What is the pool? Why isn't there someone telling me on the internet what the pool is and why people are going in spacesuits into that pool? Because it's very weird, but it's fascinating. Or, for example, another thing that social media gives you is the opinion of the people. So Space Gal goes on and she asks her followers, do you want to hear about Mars or about the moon today? So the audience is going to vote for the moon, for example, and then that audience is going to come back because it expects to learn about the moon. So instead of just telling, oh, there's the moon, you know, it's a celestial body, they are creating tension and traction. And people come back because they know that their opinion is going to be heard. And they're going to come back because they want that kind of content. And when you're asking the audience what they want, they're going to come back because they know that you're going to deliver. Traditional media doesn't give you this opportunity, because traditional media only goes, for example, for a lunch. It covers the lunch and that's it. But if traditional media found a way of communicating like influencers do, where they listen to the audience and bring the audience what they want, or vice versa, that would be absolutely great. But for now, I encourage everyone who wants in this room to tell about your lives, because your lives are fascinating. Your lives are something no one has access to. And I think it's great that people want to see and hear that. And thank you, Remco, for the question.
And I'm actually going to add on to that, because when we're on the topic about personalizing stories, it's something that all of us can do. Many of us are active on social media, and the example that you gave, Stacey, is perfect. By telling your story of how you experience this event, that's really what people are interested in. And I'm going to challenge you to do a little experiment, because we all take pictures of things that we post on social media. There is a big difference if you take a picture of a random object, a rocket. You take a picture of a rocket and you post it, and people will like it or not. Now take that same picture, but turn around and put yourself in the picture. Many people are too shy to do that. People are not interested in me. There's this cool rocket, and try it. You'll get at least twice the number of likes if you put yourself in exactly that same picture. I don't know why people are so, well, I do know why people are so interested, because people want to see a personal experience. They don't want to see the rocket, they want to see a person and the rocket and the personal experience that that person has in that particular situation. So that's a tip, free tip, if you like, on how to improve your social media presence in that sense. I'm going to move on to the last question, because again, that is something where we are looking more at you, and we're going to ask you a few things. This is about what you here in the room and online can do to help the media tell those stories. What would you wish, as well, from your perspective as a journalist, the space industry, including agencies, companies, research institutes, everybody that's represented here, what would you wish that these companies, these people do to provide more to help the global media better communicate and promote space exploration? So what is the role of the people here in the room in providing you with information? Stacey, you're laughing, so you're first.
I actually have prepared a list of things I would like to ask people to do, if I may. First, I'm asking you for better communication, because I, as a space journalist, do not get enough communication with you. I want to know what's happening in your lives, and I don't want that in the form of very boring, very short, or very long press releases. I want it in a fun way, because otherwise it's me who has to create a way of making your stories fun. And actually, it would be much greater if you already had something fun and you sold it in a fun way, that I don't have to create things for you. Number two is incentive. I need you, the industry, to create stories for me. So, for example, a lot of small companies are telling me they don't have enough time for social media, or they don't have enough time for press releases. One certain example is of a company which is building small satellites with a group of school children now, and they have a competition on it. And I asked them, can you please send me the press release? And the guys go, we don't have one. I'm like, you have over 500 groups of students creating satellites which are going to go to space, and you don't have a press release? Well, how are people going to know about it? And they're like, we don't have time. And the third is, please create a person who is representative to the media, because when I go again on your website, I want to find a name or a phone number or an email where I can find you, because otherwise I will not be able to find you, which means I won't be able to tell your story. And I think that your story should be told. So those three, communication, incentive, and a person of contact, would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Very valuable tips. I hope you're all taking notes here. Maxime, may I go to you?
Okay, I agree with Anastasia that, in fact, the advice is quite simple. Be more open to media. And be ready to communicate with media. Don't hide from us. And please understand that when we need information for you, we need it quite quick, because news became obsolete very quickly. And I would say that many space companies go this way. And for example, if we speak about Roscosmos, they do a great deal of communicating with media. But there is another problem. A lot of companies, they do corporate media, and they produce a lot of corporate content, including video, written content, and so on. And sometimes there is illusion that the corporate media can substitute real media. And I think this is a problem, because corporate media can't stay critical as traditional media do. So that's why is advice for the space companies is that, to have a balance between the corporate media and talking with the traditional media, because both things are equally important. And in fact, corporate media, they can help journalists to better understand what company is doing, and maybe help to get some content like videos and pictures that can be used in creating content for the traditional media. So.
Okay, thank you. I'll stay on this side. Stephen?
I have to say, I think most corporate media is an enormous amount of navel-gazing, and they have very little idea how to attract a public voice, because invariably press releases are the product of about 10 different committees and people, all of whom want to have their say in the press release. So that press release that goes to the media outlets is normally something that makes you fall asleep. A dry NASA press release on paper could be turned into a 30-minute piece with visuals and a guest expert to translate if it was written well, and written in such a way to jog people's imaginations in the morning, the editor perhaps. Otherwise, there's 2 or 3 levels of media when it comes to this. After all, commercial broadcasters need to sell a product. They need to sell soap. If space content doesn't help them do that, then what use is it? A Man on Mars sells a lot of product, a lot of soap. Specialist media, like space-related YT channels or science programs like PBS's Nova, are preaching to the choir. Public broadcasters tend to split the difference, more and deeper content than commercial, but not as much detail as the specialists. But again, it goes back to writing. It goes back to very simple communication of shouting about what you've achieved and where science is going and what the ambition is in space, and sold with the right level of infectious enthusiasm. If you do that, then people will get interested. And you've got to take that story out to the schools and the colleges. You know, one person, once I did a series of charity things at the UN around engineering, and a young man said, how do you make, going back to sexy again, how do you make engineering sexy? Because, you know, when I tell people I want to be an engineer, they sort of tend to yawn a bit. And it's probably true of scientists. You know, scientists are in their own world and they need to move into ours. And one problem about that is most governments, and I might be going out on a limb, and Remco, you'll know far more than me, are run by arts graduates, not science graduates. So they don't have a vested interest in selling science.
Very good point, and that's kind of linked to what Leif was saying earlier, that we should put some effort in science education to include science communication, and vice versa, that we should insert some science into journalism to create exactly that balance between journalism and science and engineering. But Leif, may I ask you the same question? What do you expect from the people here in the room and the people online to give you to better report?
People tell stories, not facts, not press sheets, not diagrams. The three basic dimensions of good storytelling is information, fascination, and identification. People demand stories in which they can identify themselves. I could have been here, I could have met the astronauts, I could have had that badge. Identification, fascination, and space is the most fascinating piece of science I know of. So you should be so rich in fascinating stories, but put persons to them rather than facts. The other hint I would give is more or less suicidal for a journalist, because I support the statement of Anastasia, or the observation that we don't need media any longer. Media is like a middleman. The science corporations, they can educate their own communicators and simply take their way directly to the pockets of the consumers without being hanged by the critical journalists under its way. So provide the media, but also the users in broad and general, the media consumers, with fascinating, identifiable stories about space and science. And thirdly, give it a chance to rebrand for the next decade, to rebrand science and space from industry and technology into saving the globe from the climate. Science and space as the saviors of our global climate issue. That's like a statement or a brand that would sell automatically for the next decade.
Thank you. That's a very powerful message. Before I summarize this session, we have a few minutes and we have quite a few questions. So I'm personally going to take the challenge to take the questions that I can't answer right now because we run out of time, and see if I can answer them online through social media, and perhaps IAF is willing to help me there to get some of these questions out, because there's a lot of valuable information. Let me first of all go to the top question, and Stephen, if I may address that question, it's in your screen, the top question to you. It's really about how to reconcile journalism, in your specific case, with working for government-run outlets that are unfortunately sometimes accused of publishing propaganda.
Yeah, every government-run television station is accused of pushing propaganda. Most 24-hour news global stations are vanity projects, and they are a license to lose money, in other words. I've launched 4 or 5, starting. I launched Sky News in '89, I launched CNN International in America, and then I launched BBC World, and I launched Al Jazeera. in London and then Doha. Al Jazeera, when it was launched, was Terror TV. That's how Donald Rumsfeld described Al Jazeera. And when I left, and this isn't a coincidence, when I left, 9 years later, Hillary Clinton said it was the best news channel in the world, which was quite a change, quite a shift. But a lot of channels have a bias towards the government, whether it would be TRT in Turkey. I can't speak for any others. I've executive produced and presented 87 shows, and I don't recognize any propaganda in any of those shows. I have to say that I steer well clear of politics.
Very good, thank you very much. I would like to move on to the two questions that are voted up next, but I'm going to combine them because they're very close together. You can only see one of them, so I'll read them out. The first one is about competition in space versus cooperation. Again, someone using the word sexy in the question. So what is more sexy for media to catch the attention of public? Is it the competition, or is it this collaboration that we've been talking about for 3 days and that we're all looking forward to? And I'm going to combine it with the next question, which says, how important is the role of astronauts in helping media keep and raise public excitement? So this is the human versus the robotic space exploration. So we have two extremes, and well, maybe I can ask who would like to pick up this question. Yeah, Maxime?
Okay, answering the first question, I think it's a straight answer is that, of course, competition is more sexy for media to attract attention in public. But I think the point is not about competition or cooperation. We can focus on achievement, and I think the achievement as a story is the most sexy things to attract the attention. So I think that's what we should focus on writing about space, on achievements, not on competition.
Excellent. Anyone else want to pick this up? Leif?
I feel convinced to competition on space belonged to the 1970s and ended up with a bad image of science and space. I think cooperation would be like a newsbreaker. Cooperation, I see for me a campaign, a global campaign with astronauts and cosmonauts as the ambassadors of a global alliance for the climate. The climate gardeners or watchers campaigned jointly by the NASA, the ESA, the Chinese space agencies, and Roscosmos. That would be a newsbreaker to go together to save the climate by knowing about it, by measuring it, by watching it from space.
Stacey?
I would like to point out that in both competition and cooperation there is a shin, which is also in innovation, and both cooperation and competition creates innovation, so we don't care if it's competition or cooperation, we want things to be new. Unfortunately, the world sells scandal better than success and friendship, so I'm not going to say that competition doesn't create a bigger buzz, but if you do something great, amazing, and then you sell it to the media, it's going to be still better than anything else. And about the astronauts, I think there was a piece about the astronauts.
Sorry, whether it's astronauts help to make the story more interesting.
Absolutely, because we've mentioned on this panel a couple of times today that space needs a face, and an astronaut is the ideal space face. So if we put those together and we also teach the person to communicate with other people, like Chris Hadfield did, how a couple of other, I'm going to mention Paolo Nespoli as well, and others.
Brian Cox. Brian Cox is a brilliant example.
So the more new faces we get who will actually talk to the public, the better. And I would like to welcome Sergei Konstantinovich also, who is a great cosmonaut and an example of a person who communicates really well.
Thank you, Stacey. I'm gonna with that quote, space needs a face, and then Mr. Krikalev walking into the room is the perfect end to this. So I'm gonna close. I'm going to close by concluding that I'd like to thank my panelists for stepping away from their usual positions in the dark corners of the room and into the spotlight. I would like to thank you, the audience, here in the room and online, and I would like to, I would invite you to find us online and try to continue this discussion. As I said, I will try to answer some of the questions online. And finally, I would really like to ask, to thank Christian and the IAF for the initiative, for bringing the space media on stage at this conference, and I really hope that today can be a template, an example for engaging the media in space conferences much more actively going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Remco. I mean, we are extremely pleased as we thought of this first experiment to bring media up on stage. We were not sure how this will play out, but the result is just outstanding. I think everybody was really captured by all the messages you have given. And I think this is the way to go forward. At the end, we, the IAF, are the world-leading advocacy organization in space. If we do not get together and cooperate with media, then I think we have a problem. So we are happy to cooperate with you, and I'm sure we'll continue this series of panels also in the future. Thank you very much.